When Zoe Martinez takes the wrong elevator to what she thinks is a simple art gallery opening, she crashes Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala and meets mysterious heir, Nolan Cross. What begins as a magical dance in a crystal ballroom quickly spirals into a deadly game of secrets, betrayal, and murder. Asterisk, welcome back, beautiful people. Today's story is equal parts drama and devotion, and trust us, you'll be hooked from the very first line. Asterisk, asterisk, the champagne glass shattered against marble like a gunshot in the cathedral silence of the Manhattan penthouse. Zoe Martinez watched golden liquid spread across her borrowed black dress, seeping into fabric that cost more than her monthly rent. Around her, conversations died mid-sentence as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the mess she'd made of herself. "Breathe," she whispered, crouching to collect the crystal shards with trembling fingers. Blood bloomed from a small cut on her palm, mixing with champagne on the pristine floor. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. She'd taken the wrong elevator. Simple as that. Emma had said 15th floor for the gallery opening. But somehow Zoe had ended up 3 floors higher at what appeared to be Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala. Women dripped in diamonds, moved like predators through the space, their designer gowns rustling secrets. Men checked watches worth more than her car while discussing mergers that would reshape entire industries. "You're bleeding."
Ow.
The voice came from above her, warm and concerned. Zoe looked up to find a man kneeling beside her, his perfectly pressed tuxedo somehow making her feel smaller. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made her chest tight. "I don't belong here," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Neither do I." His smile was crooked, genuine, in a room full of practiced expressions. "I'm Nolan. Zoe." She accepted the cloth napkin he offered, pressing it against her bleeding palm. "And I should leave before security throws me out." "They won't." Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could identify it. "Trust me." The orchestra began a waltz, and couples glided toward the center of the room like they'd been choreographed. Zoe had never seen anything so beautiful or so intimidating. These people moved through life with a confidence she'd never possessed. Born into a world where mistakes didn't leave you bleeding on marble floors? "Dance with me," Nolan said, standing and offering his hand. "Can't dance like that. I'll teach you." Before she could protest, his hand settled on her waist and pulled her into the music. The room spun around them, a blur of crystal and silk and whispered conversations. His cologne filled her senses, something expensive and clean that made her think of ocean air and old money. "Just follow my lead," he murmured against her ear. She stumbled through the first few steps, acutely aware of how out of place she looked among the swan-like women around them. But Nolan's grip was steady, his patience infinite. When she finally found the rhythm, something shifted between them. The way he looked at her made her feel like she was the only person in the room worth seeing. "You're a natural," he said as she spun under his arm. "You're a liar." But she was smiling now, caught up in the magic of movement and music. They danced through 3 songs, lost in their own world. Other couples moved around them like satellites, but Zoe barely noticed. There was something addictive about the way Nolan held her, protective yet gentle, as if she might break, but he'd never let her fall. When the music slowed, he led her through glass doors onto a terrace garden. The city sprawled below them, a carpet of lights stretching toward the horizon. Cool air raised goosebumps on her bare arms. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She turned to face him, struck again by how he seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. "Why did you help me in there?" Because you looked like you needed saving and you're in the business of saving people." His expression darkened for just a moment, something like that. A woman's laugh echoed from inside, sharp and cutting. Through the glass doors, Zoe could see a blonde in a stunning red gown holding court near the bar. Even from a distance, her beauty was intimidating, the kind that demanded attention and usually got it. "Who is that?" Zoe asked, though she wasn't sure why. Nolan followed her gaze, and his entire demeanor changed. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something cold and distant. "Someone from my past?" he said quietly. "Someone I hoped never to see again." The blonde woman turned then, as if sensing their attention. Her eyes found Nolan through the glass, and her smile turned predatory. She began walking toward the terrace doors with deliberate, measured steps. "Nolan," Zoe said, alarmed by the way he'd gone rigid beside her. "What's wrong? We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The terrace doors opened, and the woman in red stepped outside, her smile never wavering. Well, Nolan Cross." The woman's voice carried the kind of polish that came from expensive finishing schools and inherited cruelty. "I was wondering when you'd surface again." Zoe felt Nolan's hand tighten on hers, his knuckles white against her skin. The air between him and the blonde crackled with a tension so thick it made her stomach churn. "Vivian," his voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I thought you were in Switzerland." "I was. Until Daddy's lawyers tracked down some interesting financial discrepancies in the Meridian account." Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. Imagine my surprise to discover my dear departed husband's business partner had been quite busy after the funeral. Zoe looked between them, pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand clicking into place. The expensive tuxedo, the way security had let her stay without question, the familiarity with which he moved through this world of wealth and power. "Who are you?" she whispered to Nolan. "He didn't tell you?" Vivian laughed, the sound like breaking glass. How deliciously typical. Nolan Cross, heir to the Cross shipping fortune, or he was, until he decided to play Robin Hood with company funds. The terrace seemed to tilt beneath Zoe's feet. She pulled her hand free from Nolan's grip, stepping backward until the stone railing pressed against her spine. "That's not what happened," Nolan said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "No, then explain the $20 million that vanished from the Meridian account. The same account James was investigating before his accident." Vivian's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "Oh yes, darling. I know all about your little crusade. James was my best friend. I would never your best friend who married the woman you were obsessed with." Vivian stepped closer, her red dress like a bloodstain against the night sky. "Tell me, Nolan, did you think stealing from his company would somehow make me love you instead?" Zoe watched this exchange with growing horror. The man who'd held her so gently on the dance floor was a stranger, his past unraveling like thread from a torn seam. "You don't know what you're talking about," Nolan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I? Then where have you been for the past 2 years? Why did you disappear right after James died?" Vivian turned to Zoe, her smile turning sympathetic, in a way that felt like a knife to the ribs. "Has he told you about the homeless shelters? The community centers? All the noble causes he's been funding with stolen money?" Zoe's world tilted further off its axis. The way he'd moved through the homeless shelter where she volunteered, knowing exactly where to find her. The anonymous donations that had kept her gallery's youth program running when funding dried up. The 2 convenient meetings that felt like fate but now seemed calculated. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nolan's face crumpled. "Zoe, please, let me explain." "How long?" 6 months. The number hit her like a physical blow. Every coffee shop encounter, every chance meeting at the art supply store, every moment she'd thought they were building something real had been a lie. "You used me," she breathed. "No, it started that way. But what? You decided the poor girl from Queens might make good cover? Someone desperate enough to believe in fairy tales?" Vivian watched their exchange with obvious delight. "Well, this is even better than I hoped. He really made you think he cared, didn't he?" "Shut up, Vivian." Nolan's composure finally cracked, his voice raw with pain. "You're destroying." "What I'm destroying?" Vivian's laugh was harsh. "You destroyed everything the moment you chose revenge over reason. James is dead because of you." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Nolan went perfectly still, his face draining of all color. "That's not true," Zoe said, though she wasn't sure why she was defending him. "Isn't it?" Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. The police report was very clear. James was driving to meet someone when he lost control on that mountain road. Someone who'd been threatening to expose his business practices unless he agreed to fund certain charitable initiatives. Nolan's hands were shaking now. "I never threatened him. I just wanted him to see what the company was doing to people. Like the factories, the working conditions so noble, so pure." Vivian's voice dripped venom. And when he refused to bankroll, your guilty conscience, you decided to take matters into your own hands. I took that money after he died, to honor him, to do what he would have wanted. You took that money because you're a coward who couldn't face the consequences of your actions. Vivian stepped closer to Nolan, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. You killed my husband, and then you stole from his company. And now you've dragged this poor girl into your mess. Zoe looked at Nolan, searching his face for some sign that Vivian was lying. But all she saw was guilt and pain and a darkness that made her chest ache. I need to go, she said, moving toward the terrace doors. Zoe, wait. Nolan reached for her, but she jerked away from his touch. Don't. Just don't. She pushed through the glass doors, leaving behind the two people whose secrets had just blown her world apart. The elevator couldn't come fast enough. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Nolan standing alone on the terrace, his face a mask of devastation. But even as the elevator descended, carrying her away from the penthouse and its beautiful lies, Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Something in Nolan's eyes, when Vivian spoke about her husband's death, something that looked less like guilt and more like fear. The lobby doors opened onto the Manhattan street, and cool night air hit her face like a slap. Behind her, the skyscraper rose into darkness, its windows glowing like watching eyes. Her phone buzzed. Oh. A text from an unknown number. Meet me tomorrow. Pier 47. Midnight. There's something you need to know about James Meridian's death, and about why Vivian really came back. Pier 47 stretched into the Hudson River like a finger pointing toward secrets.
Oh.
Fog rolled off the water, turning streetlights into ghostly halos. Zoe pulled her jacket tighter as she walked toward the end of the dock, each footstep echoing in the silence. She'd spent the entire day trying to convince herself not to come. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that she should forget about Nolan Cross and his twisted history. But something stronger than reason had driven her here. A figure emerged from the shadows near the warehouse, and her heart hammered against her ribs. But it wasn't Nolan who stepped into the pale light.
You came.
The man was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. I wasn't sure you would. Who are you? Detective Ray Morrison. Retired. I worked James Meridian's. Casey lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. I've been watching Vivian Cross ever since. Cross. She kept her maiden name for business. Meridian was just the husband. Morrison took a long drag. Tell me, what did she say about her husband's death? Zoe wrapped her arms around herself, the fog seeming to seep into her bones. That Nolan threatened him. That James was driving to meet him when he crashed. She's half right. Morrison flicked ash into the water. James was driving to meet someone. But it wasn't Nolan. The pier seemed to sway beneath her feet. What are you talking about? James Meridian was a good man in a bad business. When he inherited the company, he started asking questions about their overseas operations. Factories with locked doors? Workers earning pennies, safety violations that would make your skin crawl. Morrison's voice grew harder. Someone in the company was getting rich off human misery, and James was getting close to figuring out who. Vivian. Smart girl. Vivian had been skimming from multiple accounts for years, using shell companies to hide the money trail. James started his investigation. She panicked. Morrison pulled out a manila envelope, water-stained and thick. This is what James died for. Inside were photographs, documents, bank statements. Zoe's hand shook as she flipped through them. The evidence was overwhelming. Account numbers that traced back to Vivian. Factory reports that had been falsified. Payments to officials who looked the other way while workers suffered. James called me the night he died, Morrison continued. Said he had proof that would destroy someone close to him. Said he was meeting them to give them a chance to come clean before he went to the authorities. But the police report was influenced by people with very deep pockets. Vivian's family has connections that go back generations. It was easier to blame a dead man than investigate a living woman with powerful friends. Zoe stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. What about Nolan? Nolan Cross is guilty of exactly one thing: being too late to save his best friend. Morrison's expression softened. He figured out what Vivian had done about 6 months after the funeral. That's when he started taking money from the company accounts to frame her, to do what James would have wanted. Fund programs for workers, support families who'd been exploited, build shelters for people the system forgot. Morrison smiled grimly. Robin Hood, like Vivian said, but not a thief. A man trying to balance the scales. The fog swirled around them, and somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn moaned across the water. Zoe felt like she was drowning in revelations, each one pulling her deeper into a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. Why are you telling me this? 'Cause Vivian isn't done. She's back to tie up loose ends, and that includes Nolan. And now it includes you. Morrison's eyes were grave. She knows he cares about you, so that makes you leverage. As if summoned by his words, headlights swept across the pier. A black sedan pulled up to the warehouse, its engine purring like a satisfied predator. The door opened, and Vivian stepped out, her red coat a splash of blood against the night. "Detective Morrison," she called, her voice carrying easily across the water. "Still playing hero, I see." Morrison dropped his cigarette and crushed it. "Under his heel, Mrs. Cross. Out for a late-night drive, something like that." She walked toward them with slow, deliberate steps. "Hello again, Zoe. I hope the good detective has been enlightening you about the complexities of justice." "You killed your husband," Zoe said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I did what was necessary to protect my family's legacy." Vivian stopped a few feet away, close enough that Zoe could see the coldness in her perfectly made-up eyes. James was weak. It would have destroyed everything we'd built over some misguided sense of morality. Those were people's lives. Those were acceptable casualties in a larger game. Vivian's smile was arctic. "But I'm not here to debate ethics with children. I'm here to make a deal." Morrison stepped protectively in front of Zoe. "What kind of deal?" "The kind where everyone gets what they want." Nolan stops his crusade, returns what he stole, and disappears quietly. "In exchange, I don't have him arrested for theft, and you don't end up in the river with concrete shoes. And if we refuse..." Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her smile widening. "Then you'll have to explain to Nolan why his warehouse full of evidence just went up in flames." In the distance, orange light flickered against the fog. Smoke rose from somewhere across the river, and the wail of sirens began to echo off the water. "You see, Nolan made one crucial mistake," Vivian continued conversationally. "He thought he could gather evidence against me without consequences, but I've had people watching him for months. Every document, every photograph, every piece of proof he collected is currently becoming ash." Zoe's phone rang. Nolan's name flashed on the screen. "Answer it," Vivian said. "Put it on speaker. Let's all hear what our hero has to say." With trembling fingers, Zoe accepted the call. Nolan's voice was rough with smoke and desperation. "Are you safe? Please tell me you're safe." "I'm here," she managed. "Good. Listen to me very carefully. Vivian is not done. She'll come. For you next, and I can't protect you if you don't trust me." "Nolan," Vivian called sweetly. "How's the fire department treating you?" Silence stretched across the line, thick with understanding and dread. "Hello, Vivian." 2 years, Nolan's voice crackled through the phone, hoarse from smoke and something deeper than physical exhaustion. 2 years I spent building that case against you, and now it's gone." Vivian examined her manicured nails with theatrical boredom. "Along with that charming little warehouse you thought was so secure?" Zoe watched orange flames dance on the horizon, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Every piece of evidence Morrison had shown her, every document that could prove Vivian's guilt, was turning to ash across the river. "But I'm not unreasonable," Vivian continued. "I'm willing to offer terms. I'm listening." You return every penny you stole from Meridian Industries. You sign a confession stating that you embezzled funds to cover gambling debts. You disappear. Permanently. Morrison shook his head violently, mouthing, "Don't do it." But Zoe could hear something. Breaking in Nolan's breathing, the sound of a man who'd fought too long and lost too much. "And if I refuse, then Miss Martinez pays for your mistakes." Vivian's smile was a blade in the darkness. Corporate espionage is such a serious crime, especially when there's evidence that she helped you steal classified financial documents. "What evidence?" Zoe's voice came out as a whisper. Vivian held up her phone, scrolling through what looked like email attachments. "Security footage from your gallery, credit card receipts showing purchases of equipment used to hack company servers, and of course, your fingerprints all over documents from Nolan's warehouse." "That's impossible." "I never, darling. You volunteered at 3 different shelters that received anonymous donations from stolen funds. You had access to financial records through your gallery's fundraising database. And you've been meeting regularly with Nolan for 6 months. Vivian's voice was sickeningly sweet. Any prosecutor would see a clear pattern of conspiracy. The fog seemed to thicken around them, muffling sound and making the world feel unreal. Zoe's legs nearly gave out as she realized how thoroughly she'd been trapped. "You can't prove any of that in court," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't need to prove it in court. I just need to convince a grand jury to indict her." Vivian checked her watch. Federal prosecutors love cases involving stolen money and sympathetic victims. They'll arrest her tonight and hold her without bail pending investigation. "Zoe." Nolan's voice through the phone was raw with desperation. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." She closed her eyes, remembering the way he'd looked at her on the dance floor. The gentleness in his hands, the protection in his embrace. Had any of it been real, or just another calculated move in this deadly game? "You have 5 minutes to decide," Vivian announced. "Confession in exile, or Miss Martinez spends the next decade in federal prison." Morrison stepped closer to Zoe, his voice low and urgent. "There might be another way. If we can get you both out of the country, no." Zoe opened her eyes, looking directly at Vivian. "There's no running from this, is there? You'll never stop hunting him." Very perceptive. Vivian's approval was somehow more chilling than her threats. "Nolan represents a loose end I cannot tolerate." "Then, I have a counter-offer." Silence fell across the pier. Even the distant sirens seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of water lapping against wooden posts. "Listening," Vivian said carefully. "You want Nolan gone? Fine, but you leave him alone permanently. No more games, no more threats, no mysterious accidents." Zoe's hands were steady now, her voice growing stronger with each word. "In exchange, I'll give you something better than his confession." "What could you possibly offer that I want?" Zoe reached into her jacket and pulled out her phone, scrolling to the recording app she'd started when Morrison began telling his story. 20 minutes of Detective Morrison explaining how you murdered your husband, complete with documentary evidence and witness testimony. Morrison stared at her in shock. "Zoe, what are you doing? What needs to be done?" She held up the phone so Vivian could see the recording timer. "It's already been uploaded to cloud storage with instructions to send copies to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency if I don't check in every 12 hours. Vivian's composure cracked for the first time all night. "Am I? You want to bet your freedom on that assumption?" Zoe stepped forward, close enough to see fear creep into Vivian's perfect features. "Here's my deal. You take your blood money and disappear. Leave Nolan alone, leave me alone, and I'll keep your secrets buried. And if I refuse, then tomorrow morning, every newspaper in the country will have the story of how Vivian Cross murdered her husband and framed his best friend for theft." Zoe's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I wonder how your family's reputation will survive that scandal." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled to breaking. Somewhere in the distance, the warehouse fire still burned, sending smoke signals into the night sky. "Clever girl," Vivian said finally, "but you're forgetting one crucial detail, which is dead people can't upload files to the internet." The gunshot echoed across the water like thunder. Morrison crumpled to the pier, dark blood spreading across the weathered wood. Zoe screamed and dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her, hands against the wound in his chest. Detective Morrison was always too curious for his own good, Vivian said calmly, tucking a small silver pistol back into her coat. And now he's just another casualty of this unfortunate situation. Morrison's eyes found Zoe's, his breathing shallow and labored. "The envelope?" he whispered. "Keep it safe." "Don't talk," Zoe pleaded. "Help is coming." But they both knew. It was too late. Morrison's eyes grew distant, and his breathing stopped altogether. "Now then," Vivian said, stepping over the body like it was an inconvenience. "Where were we?" "Oh yes, you were about to delete that recording and hand over your phone?" Zoe looked up from Morrison's body, tears streaming down her face. "You're a monster. I'm a survivor. There's a difference." Vivian held out her hand. Expectantly, "The phone, please." Through the speaker, Nolan's voice crackled with static and desperation. "Zoe, what happened?" "I heard a gunshot. Detective Morrison is dead," she said quietly. "Vivian shot him." "Zoe, listen to me very carefully. Run. Right now. Get as far away from her as you can." "There's nowhere to run," Vivian said, loud enough for the phone to pick up. "Is there, darling?" But Zoe was already moving. She grabbed the envelope from beside Morrison's body and sprinted toward the end of the pier, Vivian's sharp laughter following her into the fog. The water was colder than death. Zoe surfaced gasping, envelope clutched against her chest as she struggled against the Hudson's current. Behind her, Vivian's voice carried across the water, calm and conversational as she spoke to someone. On her phone? Yes, 2 bodies. Make it look like a drug deal gone wrong. The detective was getting too close anyway. Bodies. She was already dead in Vivian's mind. Zoe forced herself to swim toward the opposite shore, her waterlogged clothes dragging her down with each stroke. The envelope was disintegrating in her hands, Morrison's evidence bleeding into the dark water. But her phone, sealed in its waterproof case, still glowed with Nolan's desperate voice. "Zoe, please answer me. Are you alive?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe enough to form words. But she managed to tap the screen, sending her GPS location before the phone finally died. By the time she dragged herself onto the rocky shoreline, sirens were wailing across the city. Not coming toward the pier, she realized with growing horror, but toward downtown. Toward the courthouse where Morrison had said he'd hidden backup copies of James's evidence. Vivian wasn't leaving anything to chance. Shivering and soaked, Zoe stumbled through the abandoned industrial district until she found a phone booth that looked like it. Hadn't been used since the 1990s. She fed coins into the slot with numb fingers and dialed the number Morrison had made her memorize. "FBI tip line. My name is Zoe Martinez. I've information about the murder of James Meridian and Detective Ray Morrison." "Ma'am, I need you to slow down. Vivian Cross killed them both. She's destroying evidence right now, and she's going to kill Nolan Cross next." The words poured out of her in a flood. Everything Morrison had told her mixed with everything she'd witnessed. "Please, you have to stop her." "Ma'am, where are you calling from?" But the line went dead. Someone had cut the phone cord. Zoe turned to find 2 men in expensive suits standing behind her, their faces professionally blank. "Miss Martinez. Mrs. Cross would like to have a word." They didn't touch her, didn't threaten her. They didn't need to. She'd seen what Vivian was capable of, and she knew these men would do whatever was necessary to bring her back. The ride across the city passed in a blur of streetlights and dread. They pulled up in front of the same Manhattan skyscraper where this nightmare had begun, the penthouse windows glowing like watching eyes. The elevator ride to the top felt like ascending to hell. Vivian was waiting in the same ballroom where Zoe had first danced with Nolan. But now the space felt different, sinister.
Oh.
The crystal chandeliers cast sharp shadows, and the marble floor reflected nothing but darkness. "You look terrible, darling." Vivian handed her a towel with mock concern. "River water is so unforgiving to the complexion." "Where's Nolan?" "Safer now." Vivian gestured toward the terrace doors, which now showed the city burning. Not literally, but close enough. Smoke rose from a dozen different locations, each one marking another piece of evidence going up in flames. He's been watching his life's work turn to ash. It's really quite poetic. Can't destroy everything, can't I? Vivian's smile was radiant. By morning, there will be no evidence that James Meridian was murdered. Detective Morrison will have died in a shootout. With drug dealers? And you and Nolan will have tragically perished in a lover's suicide pact. Overcome by guilt over the money you stole together. The ballroom doors opened, and 2 more men entered, dragging Nolan between them. His face was battered, his tuxedo torn and bloody, but his eyes found hers immediately. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this. How touching." Vivian produced her silver pistol again.
Oh.
True love conquers all, except bullets. Wait. Zoe stepped forward, her mind racing. "There's something you need to know." "About that recording? What about it?" "It wasn't just uploaded to cloud storage. I sent it to someone. Someone you can't touch." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Emma. My friend Emma. The one who invited me to the art opening." Zoe's voice grew stronger, more confident. "She works for the Washington Post, and she is very specific. Instructions about what to do if something happens to me." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Emma Martinez, investigative reporter." "Look her up," Zoe smiled, remembering her friend's obsession with conspiracy theories and government cover-ups. "She's been suspicious about James Meridian's death since it happened. Been gathering information, asking questions. All she needed was proof." For the first time all night, Vivian looked genuinely uncertain. "Even if that were true," she said, "slowly it wouldn't matter. Accidents happen to reporters all the time. Not this reporter. Emma's paranoid enough to have dead man switches on everything. If anything happens to her, or to me, or to anyone she cares about, everything gets released automatically." Zoe stepped closer, close enough to see doubt creeping into Vivian's perfect features. "You want to bet your empire on being able to? Kill everyone fast enough." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Nolan watched from across the room, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "There's another option," Zoe said quietly. "One that lets everyone walk away. I'm listening." "Confession." "Full confession to James's murder, recorded and witnessed. In exchange, the evidence stays buried forever." "Absolutely not. And enjoy explaining to your family why their empire crumbled, because you were too proud to admit what you did." Pulled out her backup phone, the one Vivian's men hadn't thought to check. "Emma's already writing the story. All I have to do is send one text, and it goes live in every major newspaper in the country." Vivian stared at the phone like it was a venomous snake. "You're bluffing. Try me." The standoff lasted an eternity. Finally, Vivian lowered her gun. "You have 5 minutes to record your message," Zoe said. "Tell the truth about James, all of it, and then you disappear. Take your money and vanish forever. Okay? Because if I ever see you again, if you ever come near Nolan or anyone I care about, that recording goes public and your life becomes a living hell." Vivian's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Naive little girl. Do you really think this ends here? It ends here, or it ends with you in prison. Your choice." The woman who had murdered her husband and terrorized them both looked suddenly older, the weight of her crimes etched in the lines around her eyes. She walked to the center of the ballroom where the chandeliers cast her in harsh relief. "My name is Vivian Cross," she began, her voice steady despite everything. "And I killed my husband, James Meridian." The confession poured out of her like poison from a wound. Every detail Morrison had suspected, every cruel calculation that had led to James's death. She spoke for exactly 5 minutes, her voice never wavering, her eyes never leaving Zoe's face. When she finished, the silence was deafening. "There," she said, straightening her coat. "Are you satisfied?" Zoe saved the recording and uploaded it to 3 different cloud servers. "The money you stole goes back to the workers' families. All of it. Fine. And Nolan's name gets cleared publicly. A press release explaining that new evidence has exonerated him of all charges." "Done." Vivian's smile was sharp as ever. "Understand something, Miss Martinez. This isn't over. It's never over. I may disappear, but there are others like me. There will always be others like me. Then I'll be ready for them." Vivian laughed one last time and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to nothing. "Enjoy your victory, darling. I hope it keeps you warm at night." The elevator doors closed and she was gone. Zoe ran too. Nolan, her hands shaking as she untied the ropes that bound him. He collapsed into her arms, both of them sinking to the cold floor. "Is it really over?" he whispered against her hair. "I don't know." She held him tighter, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. "But we're alive." "The evidence Morrison gathered, most of it burned. But I recorded everything he told me. It'll be enough to clear your name and help the families who were hurt." They sat there in the empty ballroom as dawn broke over Manhattan, two broken people holding each other together. The crystal chandeliers caught the early light, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor where they'd first danced. "What happens now?" Nolan asked. "Now we figure out how to live with what we know." Zoe pulled back to look at his face, memorizing the way the light fell across his features. "Together if you want to? After everything I've put you through?" "You didn't put me through anything. We went through it together." She touched the cut on his cheek, her fingers gentle against his skin. "Besides, someone has to make sure you spend that guilt money on the right people." His laugh was rough, but genuine. "Is that your way of saying you love me?" "That's my way of saying I choose you. Despite everything, because of everything." She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sure. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Outside the penthouse windows, the city was waking up. Traffic moved through the streets below. People hurried to work. Life went on as if the world hadn't changed. But for Zoe and Nolan, everything was different now. They had paid the price of truth in blood and betrayal. They had looked into the darkness at the heart of wealth and power and chosen to fight back. They had lost innocence but found each other. And in a world where monsters wore designer clothes and murder could be covered up with the right connections, that felt like the only victory that mattered. 6 months later, Zoe stood in her gallery, watching children from the shelter paint their dreams on canvas. The youth program was fully funded now, along with a dozen others across the city. Nolan had been true to his word, using every penny of the recovered money to build the kind of world James Meridian had wanted to see. The morning newspaper sat folded on her desk, its headline barely worth noting: "Heiress dies in Swiss skiing. Accident." The article was brief, clinical. Vivian Cross had apparently lost control on a mountain slope. Her body found days later by rescue workers. Zoe didn't believe it for a second. Somewhere out there, Vivian was living under a new name, planning her next move, waiting for the right moment to resurface. People like her didn't die quietly in accidents. They reinvented themselves and came back stronger. But Zoe wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned to dance in a world of shadows, to find truth in the spaces between lies. Whatever came next, she would be ready. Behind her, Nolan entered the gallery, carrying coffee and the careful smile of a man learning to live without guilt. He'd testified before Congress about labor conditions overseas, started a foundation in James's name, and slowly begun to rebuild his life from the ashes of everything he'd lost. "Any word from Emma?" he asked, handing her a cup. "She's in Guatemala, following another story." Zoe accepted the coffee gratefully, but she promised to check in next week. "Good. I like knowing she's watching our backs." "Even from 2,000 miles away? Especially from 2,000 miles away?" Nolan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Besides, someone has to keep writing the stories that matter." They stood together watching the children paint, their faces bright with possibility. Outside, the city moved and breathed around them, full of shadows and light, predators and prey, heroes and monsters. But here, in this small space, carved out of darkness, love had taken root and grown into something worth fighting for. And that was enough. Subscribe for more emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next twist in our ongoing series of heart-pounding stories. The end.